Have you ever felt blindsided by life? Maybe something came out of nowhere, turned your world upside down. Perhaps a sudden job loss or a market crash, a certain pandemic we're all familiar with, or maybe just recently you saw, or perhaps you're surprised by Elon Musk spending 6 months befriending Donald Trump to suddenly decide to pick a giant fight. Regardless, we all know there is a sting to unpredictability, and this is exactly the pain point that Nassim Taleb talks about in his book, The Black Swan, and the concept that it refers to. So if you enjoy having a deeper understanding and actionable insights about the forces shaping our world, well, this episode is for you. You don't need to be an entrepreneur or investor to benefit from making sense of the unpredictable. So in this episode, I wanted to talk about helping you navigate uncertainty and ideas to help you thrive when the unexpected strikes. So welcome to the Growth Mindset Psychology podcast, where we dive into the science of self-improvement and the philosophy of a life well lived, with me, your host, Samuel Webster Harris. You may have heard that I have started a new show recently about how to change the world, and something I am seeing a lot there as I write my episodes is that the way that humans think about risk and prediction is fundamentally flawed. Time and time again throughout history, the most important events that actually change everything were the ones that no one saw coming. And you've probably noticed lately that we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. And sometimes it feels like just staying sane is almost impossible. So I thought I'd have a discussion with my old friend and favorite reading partner, Nicolas Vereecke, on some of the different lessons that we can learn from Nicolas Taleb and the Black Swan concept that challenges our assumptions about how the world works and how you can prepare for it, and perhaps even profit from the unpredictable. All coming up on the episode.
So what is a black swan? So a black swan is an event that has three key characteristics. So first, it is a big surprise. Two, it has a major impact. And three, and I think that's almost most important, it is usually rationalized in hindsight as if it was expected. And so the author argues that black swans are actually what dominates society. So all the things that happen today, all technologies that grow up, all societies that grow large, all the cities that exist and grow, it all happens in a black swan kind of fashion. So it's very hard to, using the models that we use today to model the world, predict beforehand. So the origin of the name comes from the fact that up until 1697, mankind believed that all swans were white. When Dutch explorers finally saw black swans for the first time in Western Australia, the term morphed into describing an event that occurred in spite of seeming impossible. And I think it's best illustrated by the story of the turkey. Imagine being a turkey and having someone who cares for you, who gives you food every day. And so on day one, you get born, you get some food. And the second day, you also get some food. And third day, you get some food again. And after 900 days, you still get fed enough every day. So you think, every day, the chance of you dying or something bad happening reduces. Up until the day that it finally happens, you get slaughtered for consumption. But we humans use statistical models that for each occurrence of something not happening, makes the odds of that not happening exponentially small, while that's not always the case.
As in, fatter you get as a turkey, the closer you are to being slaughtered. But on your models, the less likely you are because you've got more and more evidence that you're in a safe environment kind of thing. And that's sort of how we are with our stock markets and everything. We sort of like, the more used you are to an environment, the less you are able to cope with change and expect it. I went from London to a different part of the UK, and there was just such a difference because in London we'd had it earlier.
We're still like one of the biggest threats to humankind as a species is going to be the climate. And so the fact that we're now allowing, all the impact that we've had to recover a little bit is never a bad thing.
Yeah. And I think also just someone that has like a normal job, and so it's useful to realize the impact of them, and that's actually, it's only black swans that really drive all the major changes in human society. It's not just sort of normal life going ahead day to day in the average way that it is right now. It's something incredible and different that comes and has a big impact.
And so maybe it's time to talk about recommendations in the book, because what the author, Nassim Taleb, does is he explains what black swans are, and also then makes recommendations of how he carries his career and what he does in his daily life to account for the fact that these black swans exist. Because he argues that most people model the world after a non-black swan reality. So if we look at the stock market, for example, the stock market and how traders trade in the stock market is profoundly based around models, statistical and mathematical models that are based upon the Gaussian curve, the Gauss curve, or the normal distribution, and on existing statistical models, which are based upon that. And what he says is that in reality does not follow the normal distribution, at least not the stock market. So there are some parts in life which do follow the normal distribution. For example, people's height or people's weight. But returns on the stock market or people's incomes or people's wealth, for example, do not follow the normal distribution. So the problem is that today, majority of all people who make decisions in the stock market base themselves on models which are not applicable to the stock market. And so they have no way to correctly assess the risk that they're taking whenever they make any decisions.
Like when you rely on averages, you get just warped statistics. So as in if Bill Gates walks into a bar, the average person in the bar is a millionaire. But if you're going to have a part of someone's wealth of each one, like you're probably going to end up with not very much because of most people just earn like a normal amount. And it's the same with Y Combinator. I think 2 of their companies account for 80% of their total money they've made.
Yeah. So venture capital is a good example of how Taleb looks at his career and looks at the way to earn money. And so what he tries to do is he tries to expose himself as much as possible to positive black swans, because there are positive black swans, like, for example, the invention of the internet or Facebook or Google. These are positive black swans. And he tries to limit his exposure to negative black swans. So one thing that he doesn't do is owning stocks of big corporations. Because the only thing that can happen with a stock of a very big corporation, let's say BP, for example, British Petrol, there's only one thing that can happen, which is a very bad thing, and the stock can go down massively. There's no unlimited upside potential. While if you're invested in a startup, like, for example, Revolut, he tries to maximize his exposure to these positive black swans that have a potential to generate unlimited upside returns. And so one of the takeaways I got from what he said is, if you're doing asset allocation for whatever you own, what he says is you should allocate 85 to 90% of what you have to something really, really, really low on risk. And so there he would go to treasury bills. And the other 10 to 15%, he would invest in small portions of maximum exposure to positive black swans. Yeah. And so there he would do into VC investments, so small startups that have the potential to become the next Google. Because if you take 1% of your net worth and you invest it in a startup that becomes the next Google, then you're set for life. So that's the way he approaches these things.
There's also an interesting article by the Y Combinator founder called Black Swan Farming, which is about their strategy of basically why these business accelerators exist, which is just literally black swan farming, where they only invest in small companies that have the potential to be the next Google, which is how they ended up investing in Airbnb and companies like that and Stripe, which then become like those massive $1 billion companies. But they do this every year. They invest in like 20 startups, most of which don't do amazingly. Like many fail, many perhaps make like a small amount of money. And it's just the few that become massive multi-billion dollar companies where you need to have the odds across a lot of things to get that. So just exposing themselves to that kind of risk. But obviously it's an accelerator, so don't do all of your money like that. Follow the advice of 80% in something safe.
Exactly.
And if you're just aiming for sort of average, average doesn't actually exist where you think it does. So you're probably going to be below what the average is because you're not like the billionaire like Bill Gates. So people like Bill Gates and like any sort of music artist that's famous, like they never thought they could be as successful as they are, but yet they are. And so you have this potential to be hugely successful, like beyond your kind of wildest dreams. And otherwise, like you don't know many sort of semi-famous musicians. You're either just like an average worker that sort of just gets paid to go and do sort of not very much at all, or you're like massively rich. But if you're aiming to be kind of quite successful, you're not actually going to be like quite successful. It's going to be massive or nothing. So you just need to always think that you're going massive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think translating what he says to today, if we were very consistent and we had read this book, let's say 3 months ago, what we would have done is we would have bought put options, because that's usually what he does. He doesn't invest in normal stocks. He invests small amounts of money in order to take advantage of potential black swans, usually negative black swans. And so I think the way that he does that is he buys put options, which the contract where he buys the right to sell a stock at a certain amount of money at some time in the future. So if I had bought, let's say, a put option for the S&P 500 at the level that it used to be a month ago, and I would have bought that put option for today, to be executed today, I would have made massive amounts of money. And that's the way that he actually earns money. So instead of investing in the stock market over long periods of times and gaining a bit of money, but then potentially losing it all because of one black swan, he actually loses a bit of money the whole time and then wins a lot of money whenever the black swan happens. And that's the way he looks at the world and his money making as well.
Yeah, so does the inverse of normal. People try to make money while things are good and then like hope they have enough whilst things go mentally wrong. And he's like, when things go mentally wrong, you can make 5 times more money than you ever could do.
And things will go mentally wrong. It's just a matter of when, right?
Yeah.
It's not a matter of if. So it's going to happen. And the thing is that what I find annoying is I read his books, I understand his message, and I think I fully agree with his message, but then I'm not able to really act upon it.
Once you get older, maybe you can take that strategy. But when you're young, you don't have the longer term capacity to put all your investments. If you're 20 and in the next 10 years, a black swan event's going to happen, you can't not make money for the next 10 years. You need to kind of be making money up until that point. You can't sort of put all your money just into things that maybe have a huge upside potential, but probably don't make any money. So you need to have like capital to be able to go 10 years without making any money kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. Let's discuss the 2 concepts of Mediocristan and Extremistan, because these are concepts that keep on coming back, and it's super. Taleb looks at the world in this kind of framework, and he divides the world into 2 groups. And one group of events or things fall under the world of mediocrity, Mediocristan, and the other fall into the world of Extremistan. And so I think we shortly touched upon this, but for example, people's height and weight falls into the category of Mediocristan. And so the way to look at it is if you have 1,000 people and you take their average weight, for example, and if you then take the heaviest person alive, which weighs, let's say 500 kilos, I don't know, it's probably a bit less, but let's say he or she weighs 500 kilos. If you add them to that group of 1,000 people, it will barely impact the average. However, if you take a group of 1,000 people and you take their average net worth, and if you then add the richest person alive, their average net worth, as you said, Bill Gates works into a bar, the average person there is a millionaire is going to be the same in this case. And so that's the best way for me to think about what kind of situations belong to Mediocristan and what kind of situations belong to Extremistan.
In the same way with like health or money, is in on a given day, you can't get fat or get thin. It's like it's a long, slow process. On a given day, you can lose all your money or become a billionaire kind of thing. Maybe not a billionaire, but you can become a millionaire in a day.
Yeah, and it's probably more likely to lose all your money, usually these kind of things. Negative black swans happen very fast, and usually positive black swans happen over time. For example, the internet or companies like Google, Facebook, etc.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting concept. Something you want to add on that?
In the same way, thinking about your job, if you are someone that trades your time for money, or a baker, you need to make more bread to get more money. So how many moments can you spend making a bread roll kind of thing? It's the amount of bread rolls that you can make in a day that affects what you earn. Whereas if you're like a writer like J.K. Rowling, she writes Harry Potter once. She doesn't have to write another book for another person to buy a book. You have to make another bread roll for another person to buy a bread roll kind of thing. So
it's a concept of scalable and non-scalable jobs, right?
Exactly.
And I found it kind of ironic that the author actually suggests if someone comes to him for career advice, he would suggest them to pursue a non-scalable career. So a job in the field of Mediocristan, because he says that the odds of, there's a survivorship bias when it comes to, for example, entrepreneurs. We only hear about the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezos and the Bill Gates, people that start in their garage and get filthy rich. But we never hear, or we don't hear enough about all the people that tried and failed. The way he describes it is that there's more actors or writers being hungry than there are hungry accountants or dentists. That's what I personally try to take away from this, is that I used to work as a freelancer, as a developer, and now I moved into the world of entrepreneurship. And so I think I see myself being an entrepreneur and just starting business after business until one succeeds,
Yeah.
One, it's way more fun. And two, I expose myself to the potential upsides, benefits of a positive Black Swan.
Yeah. If you can find a way to sort of, as in like the 80%, 85% to sort of 15% of your investment, it sounds like you should be spending 85% of your time being a contractor and just 10% on like a startup.
I mean, it's a bit of a gamble, but most people do. Like if you go work for a big company, you're probably going to earn a higher salary than you do if you start your own company. That makes sense. And so in the end, I think happens is that people who work in a big company, they start saving up the extra money, right? So they have, let's say they need 1,500 euros to survive and they earn 2.5K. So they have 1,000 that they can put into their savings. And if you're an entrepreneur, you will never be able to pay yourself 2.5K. So let's say that you pay yourself 1.5, just enough to survive, and there's no way for you to save. And then what you're actually doing is you're saving is the upside potential of your venture. I think that's the way I'm looking at it. And that's how I try and live my life, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of relates to stuff we were talking about before the episode. A fundamental shift in what is valuable potentially, as in when the world has massive Black Swan events. Because if climate change goes nuts and we need to have the government enforcing complete changes in the way we live our lives, and perhaps if you spent all this time earning money to have like different houses and all these things, but there's countries that are uninhabitable and people come in and just need to be given houses, maybe the government just takes land off people and just says, hey, humans, you haven't got enough space. If there's space here, it becomes this other person's. And it doesn't really matter that it's got your name on it currently. It won't have your name on it anymore, kind of thing. And certainly, I mean, I was in Israel where the Jewish nation came and was just given half of Israel from the people that already lived there, and people were just thrown out of their houses and had nowhere to live. The Israeli nation can still come and just destroy houses at any given moment. You kind of realize that what you think is normal can just be taken away from you. Just because your name's written somewhere doesn't mean that you actually own a house. Being more ready for these things, like I said, like having more of a resilient mindset and ability to change is important in the world of Black Swans.
Exactly. And I think what you're saying right now is probably the main message from the book. And it is that open your minds to the worst kind of scenarios. You can't know what's going to happen, but you can try and figure out how the worst thing that could happen will impact you. One of the messages in the book is to understand that and make sure that you're ready when the worst thing that could happen happens.
Yeah. And I think it goes quite a lot into how bad we are at predicting things. And then if you are prepared for specific events, you're less prepared than someone that's just slightly prepared for everything. So if you expect something very specific to happen, so let's say you've had hurricanes before and you just invest all of your emergency resources into defending against hurricanes, then you're not prepared for other events such as a pandemic. Whereas if you just know that crap happens and you just invest more in emergency services and teaching your nation to follow your instructions and change things, you're much more prepared for different possibilities that you can't really predict. Expecting that you're not going to be able to know what to expect.
We should all start watching Bear Grylls videos fast.
Definitely.
To be able to survive in the wild. All right. One concept I would also like to touch upon is the Ludic fallacy. And so the Ludic fallacy is the tendency of humans to use things they know to explain events. And so I think the best illustration of this is a casino. And so the author describes all the measures that a casino takes to limit their potential losses. And as you might expect, they install cameras everywhere and they limit all the risk that they run, the operational risk that they run while running a casino. So they make sure that there's no cheaters, no counting cards, and people cannot make very, very big bets. And so they've invested millions and millions of dollars into reducing their operational risk. And in the end, looking back, the biggest losses that the casino made, which totaled in the hundreds of millions, were one of their artists got attacked by his or her animals. So they had a show with animals.
Yeah, it's one with a tiger.
Yeah. So that was one. Then the other one was one of their employees who had to send some tax reports, actually just never sent the tax reports. And so they got like a huge fine for that. And so in the end, the Ludic fallacy is that the casino assesses the risks using what they know. which is casino games, roulette, blackjack, and slot machines. But they don't take into account any other types of risk. And so if they had gotten any kind of insurance for example, an employee that's not doing their job, they would be way better off. And that's a Ludic fallacy. It's like we try to use models we know to explain the stuff we don't know. And that's a very big mistake. Some other points you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, the 80-20 rule. I quite liked his assessment of that, as in it could actually be the 51 rule. They're not the same ratios at all, but as in it's just the most gains come from like a smaller part of the population, like the 20% results in the 80% of gains kind of thing. But then within that 20%, it's the same rule again. The 20-80 rule is just like it's a random part on the curve of the way these two things interlap that just happen to sound good, that gets stated, but it's actually not fully accurate.
If you try to use that principle for wealth, for example, you can say that the top 0.00001% owns like 50% of all wealth, like that.
Definitely. I think like non-fiction authors, it's like 5 books a year account for like 90% of sales or something. Silly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really crazy how, that's the common point in the book. It's that humans, we try to model the world according to something we can understand. And so the normal distribution and the 80-20 rule, we understand. And then we try and apply it to everything in the world, while he suggests that we should work the other way around. So instead of coming up with a model and then applying it to the world, we should look at the world, have as experiences as possible, have as much data as possible, and then use that to create a model and use that to assess the future and its risks and probabilities.
Yeah.
All right. That rounds up the episode. We discussed Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. Black Swan is the second book in Nassim Taleb's series on randomness.
All right. Thanks, Nico, for coming on the show. We both really enjoyed Nicolas Taleb's entire series called the Inserto series. There's 5 books, which are all timeless works of great wisdom. If you haven't read them, I can highly recommend them. And then in terms of take-homes from this episode on the Black Swan concept, firstly, Black Swan events are the biggest force for world change that shape our world, from technology breakthroughs to financial crashes or social revolutions. They are very unpredictable and very high impact surprises that seem obvious once they've happened because they are so fundamental to then how we live our lives, yet they are rarely planned for. Secondly, this means that we should put more time preparing for unpredictable events rather than for expected events. Our normal risk analyses and distribution curves fail to account for the real nature of reality because black swans are things that haven't happened before and aren't in our data sets. So we shouldn't necessarily use past models and data for trying to invest or think about our career. We should actually be thinking about the things that we can't plan for, which sounds hard, but the final point is that you should try to expose yourself to positive black swan events and limit your exposure to negative ones. That means holding safe investments in stable places and with a small allocation towards opportunities with unlimited upsides. Hopefully that was a useful enough summary to remind you of the main points. If you enjoyed the episode and thinking bigger about what changes the world, you will definitely love my new show because it is literally about how to change the world, and it's a highly produced narrative story of every major event the world has ever been through and the tools and tactics that you can use to make global change. And I really think it's one of the best things I've ever done. Regardless, when it comes to this episode, let me know what you think in the comments. And if anything's been on your mind or worrying you lately, I'd love to know what you're thinking about. Maybe it's something I should make an episode on. Remember, the world has always been quite crazy, and if you are feeling extra worried lately, a huge life improvement can be found by simply looking at the news less and using social media less. All right, look after yourselves. Don't put off the things you actually want to do with your life because no one is going to do them for you, and it's up to you to make them happen. Thank you so much for listening.
Go you!
Your consistency to reach the end of an episode is legendary.
My hero!
If you have any ideas or feedback for the show, I'm always interested to hear from you.
You're the best!
Studies show we need time for information to sink in, so I'm going to give you a 5-second pause, silence, to reflect on one idea from the show before you jump back into your busy life. Ready and go.